Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations. Over the weekend, the results of the North American Synod on Synodality Continental Phase meeting were revealed. If you're wondering where your invitation was to participate in the synodal process, don't worry, you're not alone. They didn't invite most of the laity to participate, except for a relative handful of chosen people so they could have a predetermined outcome for their synodal meeting. The results of this meeting are eerily similar to the results in pretty much every other continental meeting in the church, anywhere in the world you look. The laity demanded greater roles for the laity in governing the church. The laity want the church's moral teachings to be changed. The laity want a modern church that reflects the modern world. They want the faith reimagined for modern audiences. That's the takeaway from the North American Synod on Synodality, and it's the takeaway from every continental phase meeting that has been held so far. It's almost as if the whole thing had a particular goal in mind, as set by the Synod organizers in Rome, and they're working diligently to achieve it. Now, while I go over this, please keep Cardinal Roche's weird comments about there being a new theology of the Church since Vatican II in mind, because that was modernist Rome's admission that we are dealing with what is functionally a new religion in the Church since the Council. And you'll see no better proof of that than in the Synod on Synodality's documents. With all that in mind, headline from America Magazine: North American Synod document calls the Church to welcome women, the James Martin crowd, and youth. To be brutally honest with you, I could have replaced North America in that headline with European or South American and had the same result, because in virtually every continental synodal document we've seen so far, we've seen the same thing. The bishops on every continent in the world are reporting that sizable majorities of the laity want the Church to change her fundamental, ancient, and timeless teachings on the limits of who can be ordained to the priesthood, on that sin that we associate with James Martin, and that they want the Church to be more oriented towards feelings rather than the reality and consequences of sin. That must have been what was meant by all those popes and prelates who talked about a springtime in the Church after Vatican II. But this article makes a very clear point. The laity wants the Church to change, to get with the times, and the laity aren't going to be ignored since we got involved in this practice of democracy that no one with any sense wanted in the Church. Francis has himself said that the Church isn't Parliament, and that just because the majority wants something, that doesn't mean that they're going to get it, which seems aimed at all the people everywhere wanting things changed in the Church that he himself has said he can't change. But then again, he is the man who called the heretical and schismatic German synodal way, and their endorsing of literally everything you're going to hear about in this article a, quote, movement of the Holy Spirit, which was widely published in mainline Catholic media. So we'll take Francis's words on this matter with just a grain of salt. From the America Magazine article, quote, with church leaders slated to meet in October for the next phase of the Synod on Synodality, the bishops' conferences of the United States and Canada released a report this week summarizing a series of virtual meetings conducted with lay and ordained Catholics from each country earlier this year. The 39-page report, quote, for a synodal church, communion, participation, and mission, says the more than 900 participants in the, quote, continental phase of the Synod on Synodality expressed appreciation for candid conversation about the joys and tensions that come with being Catholic today. Many of those tensions, the report states, flow from the Church not welcoming the voices of women, the James Martin crowd, youth, the poor, and those still reeling from the Ted McCarrick problems back in 2003. What emerged from the assemblies was a recognition that there are strong tensions within the Church, the report states. The report compiles the input of participants in 12 virtual sessions, held in English, Spanish, and French, conducted mostly in January. The participants were about evenly split between men and women, and included in the sessions were 391 lay women, 235 lay men, 148 priests, 146 bishops, and 77 women religious. Most bishops met in separate small groups, though some decided to participate in dialogues with lay Catholics. End quote. That's the continental phase they're talking about, not the diocesan and parish level meetings that some of you were permitted to participate in. And I say permitted because very few traditionalist parishes were invited to participate in the synod. No, or very few questionnaires or surveys went out to TLM parishes. Few, if any, announcements were made to us about how the bishops wanted to hear from us during this holy process that's being foisted on all of us. And from what I gather, it wasn't only traditionalists who got the cold shoulder. In all this, it was any parish with even a remotely traditional bent to it. Still, in many other places, lay participation was curated, meaning the parish priests or bishops had their people handpick who they wanted to have participate in this process, almost as if it had a predetermined and pre-desired outcome that those running these things were seeking out. To put it mildly, the synod isn't even a legitimate effort on the part of the modernists, just judging it from basic theories about democracy. Not that I am endorsing this attempt to democratize the church or anything, but even by the standards that come with the rhetoric the modernists use to promote their terrible ideas, this entire process is illegitimate. This is made all the more obvious when we see that just around 600 people, 300 priests and bishops, 77 women religious, were expected to represent the entire continent of North America's Catholic population. Their handful of laity relative to 500 million people living in North America is kind of a problem. The U.S. reports having over 60 million Catholics, by the way, which is a number derived from what we'll call creative accounting by church officials, since people who leave the church are still counted in those numbers. But even if we take those numbers at face value, then you're seeing a small, hand-picked group of people doing this continental phase work of the Synod on synodality. Are we surprised that they came away with a heretical demand that the church essentially apostatize by embracing secularism? But it gets better. The participants who claim to be representing dioceses from across North America accuse the church of pushing people around and keeping half of the Catholic population without representation or a voice within the church. The language of the secular religion of social justice, as opposed to the Catholic concept by the same name, which are two mutually exclusive ideas, that secular concept permeates the document from start to finish. Remember, folks, as Cardinal Roche and Francis have told us repeatedly, the Church changed its theology at Vatican II, meaning its faith, and the Synod on synodality is proving that to be true. Back to the America article here, quote, "In the North American report, the role of the laity in the Church, especially when it comes to who makes decisions, featured prominently. There was a desire for greater co-responsibility among the laity and the clergy, including bishops," the report said. Describing women as, quote, "a marginalized group in the church," the report also recognized that including women in the decision-making process was important to the meeting participants, even if that meant examining topics that remain taboo in some circles, such as women's ordination. There can be no true co-responsibility in the church without fully honoring the inherent dignity of women, the report states. While clarity is still needed around exactly what a fully co-responsible church looks like, delegates proposed the examination of a variety of aspects of church life, including decision-making roles, leadership, and ordination. Participants also lamented that young people not only seem disinclined to participate in religion, but also feel that their voices are not valued. Empowering young people to more fully live out their baptismal dignity requires that we confront tensions within our communion as the body of Christ, the report states. End quote. Ah, yes, tensions. No kidding. You know, I can name some places where you can find young people in the church in abundance. Traditionalist parishes. Lots of young people with young families to be found are at those parishes, whether they're FSSP parishes, TLM-only diocesan parishes, SSPX priories, you name them in the traditionalist world, young people can be found there and can be found there in abundance. But again, we weren't invited to participate. And to be fair, those parishes represent something like 0.5% of Catholics in North America. We are a statistical outlier, a growing statistical outlier, but an outlier nonetheless, speaking in purely statistical terms. Rome doesn't care about our opinions any more than we honestly care about what Cardinal Roche thinks about us. They didn't want our opinions in this hot mess because they knew what they would get. A demand to defend the faith, teach the same faith as has always been taught by the Church, stand up to the secular world and the evils it's working to achieve, and a restoration of our liturgy. That's why we weren't invited, because as Roche and Francis have said, there's a new religion in town calling itself Catholic, and all that old timeless stuff doesn't fit here anymore. It's not welcome here anymore. Not in this era of permanent revolution in the church. The permanent nature of the revolution in the church is made abundantly clear in that document, as Crux now reports in their article on this. That article quotes one of the North American Synod organizers who wants the synodal process to continue at the local level long after the synod is over, because of course they want that. Look again at what they have demanded. Change on the teachings of the church's teachings regarding sin and the flesh, all but calling for the ordination of women. You name it, you name the error, they called for it, and it's made clear by the words of one of the organizers that this process isn't going to give people everything they want right now, but that the process should continue after the present synod is over. So quoting the Crux article, McStravig, one of the organizers, and Richard Cole, another organizer, a North American Synod team coordinator and executive director of the USCCB Department of Justice, Peace, and Human Development, wonderful, told Crux that the team plans to remain in contact with local synod leaders to help them implement feedback they heard during the local phase. Cole emphasized that there's no reason for the local synodal process to end. It doesn't need to be in the context of preparing a document. It can be in the context of parish activities, diocesan activities, school activities, and so we're hoping that we can continue to be of support to many who will try to continue to implement some of the fruits of that experience, Cole explained. There's no reason why it shouldn't be able to continue in different contexts and different settings, McStravig said. The last line of the report, quote, "The synodal process has not been perfect, but it has been good. Encapsulates the work so far and work that still lies ahead. It is really important for people to understand that it's not going to be everything all at once, and that it is going to take time, and we're going to hone our skills, and it's going to get better as we move on," McStravig said. End quote. It's never going to end. At least not until a decent pope arrives on the scene and ends this farce once and for all. I just wouldn't count on that happening anytime soon, not while so much of the laity are lukewarm and haven't taken on meaningful penances like, the 5 First Saturdays devotion. This age of error will continue in the church until we've done the basic things Our Lady, on behalf of heaven, has asked for at Fatima, Akita, La Salette, and a few other places in her approved apparitions. And that all brings me to this point. What has to happen before it becomes obvious that we really are dealing with an ape of the church, a false church calling itself the Catholic Church, but really isn't, despite having all the physical property of the church and having men who call themselves cardinals, dress like them, and act like them, and all the rest of it? Because according to numerous approved mystics of the church and visionaries in the church going back to antiquity, an ape of the church does appear as part of the chastisement of man, this fake church calling itself a Catholic Church. So what has to happen for that to be made obvious? For that to become clear that that's what we're dealing with here? And I get called a nut by some high-profile people in the Catholic blogosphere for taking those warnings seriously, by the way, just to let you know. Anyway, let me know in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. As does sharing this on social media. That helps a lot, too. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.